and remove all the seats except the pilot seat and put a big chemical tank there so I can dust American crops. And I suppose she's probably bug-eyed by this point. She explains, Janelle Bryant, that he can't just walk out of her office with $650,000 in cash. There's a process here, and it's process of application. It's a bit complex, may take some time. As she's speaking about this, he grows agitated, this so-called Muhammad Atta. And by the way, I don't think he's the same guy who was born in Egypt at all. But anyway, this guy called himself Muhammad Atta, grows agitated and says to her, "What's to prevent me from coming around the desk, cutting your throat, and taking the $650,000? And I'm thinking, okay, I think this is when you phone security or you yell very loudly. But Janelle Bryant says no, she didn't panic. She said, first of all, I don't have that amount of cash here, so it wouldn't be. Besides, I know karate. I know karate. So apparently no problem. They continued to discuss this amicably. She explains to him that in any case, you're not an American citizen, so you're not eligible. Now, at some point in this discussion, and it's not clear what the sequence of events is, but at some point in the discussion, the so-called Muhammad Atta sees an aerial photograph on the wall of her office, and it's a photograph of Washington, D.C., and he's really impressed. He says, this is the clearest, this is the best photograph of Washington, D.C. from the air that I've ever seen. Look at the Pentagon. Look at the White House. He actually mentions the Pentagon, which, of course, is later going to be attacked from the air. This is great. I have to buy this. I have to have this. He begins throwing cash on the desk. She says, no, it's not for sale. It's a personal gift. So he gets frustrated again. How would you Americans feel if someone were to come to your country and destroy these monuments, right? I'm sorry, I can't help laughing. This is the top secret terrorist talking here, right?
Right.
Who's supposed to be keeping all this very private. Then, God knows what the connection is, he begins talking about the World Trade Center. I mean, here he is, he's sitting in Florida asking for a loan. He starts talking about the World Trade Center, what an interesting place it is, he wants to visit, and he asks Janelle Bryant what the security is like there. This apparently doesn't set off any bells for her at all. I guess she just says, I don't really know what the security is like.
Why'd you ask me?
Right.
Yeah.
And then, again, I don't know what the logical transition is, but at that point it seems appropriate to him to mention that in his country, meaning Afghanistan, there's a wonderful group called Al-Qaeda. And there's a marvelous leader called Osama bin Laden. And that Osama bin Laden will be famous someday. At which point, they stand up and shake hands in a friendly manner, and she gives him a referral to go off and try and get a loan from a bank. Now, that's the story that I call Muhammad Atta asks for a loan. And I say to myself, what do we make of this complete nonsense? I mean, is it just a fabricated story? It never happened? Or did it happen, in which case, who was actually involved and why were they involved? Now, I've corresponded with other researchers, including Elias Davidson, who's a good, solid European researcher. Elias says, I'm quite sure that the incident did happen. Bryant didn't just make it up. Mm-hmm. I'm going to assume for the moment that Elias is right, in which case we have to say, so who was this guy who came in and said all this stuff? And I think the answer is pretty clear. He wasn't a top-secret terrorist planning 9/11 or planning anthrax attacks. He was an operative who had been tasked with the job of laying down a real obvious trail that somebody was supposed to follow. And he came back, by the way, later to her again. And he and the other guys were hanging around airports asking people about their crop duster planes and were they for sale, and all this stuff was going on. And I think that all of this was supposed to signal, it was preparation, basically, for the actual anthrax attacks that occurred a week after 9/11. It was a way of saying, we are going to strike you, and then we're going to strike you again with a biological attack, and it's all going to point to the obvious country in the world that has anthrax, that sprays it from airplanes, and that's Iraq. So this is an attempt to set up Iraq. They tried to set up Iraq for 9/11 and make connections, over a period of years, but it wasn't easy and it failed. If they had been able to do what they intended and to nail Iraq for the Anthrax attacks, that whole invasion of Iraq would have been much more easy. They wouldn't have had all the trouble with the UN that they had. So you see, we see here, I think, careful attempts to set up Afghanistan and Iraq, both of which the plans to invade them both had been already laid well before this. And, the attempt to set up Afghanistan went pretty well. The one to set up Iraq, the whole Anthrax thing was botched, okay? And ever since then, the FBI has been trying to cover the trail. And so, in October and November 2001, it was assumed that these two terrorist attacks were connected, and we're being told about the Irishes and the crop duster. All crop duster planes in the United States were grounded, were ordered to the ground on September 16th because of this threat. Okay.
Yeah.
And and we had one of these 9/11 hijackers who had come to a doctor with a big, strange black lesion on his leg sometime before 9/11. Well, of course, that's a prime characteristic of cutaneous anthrax infection. It's called anthrax from the word anthracite, coal. It has a coal black lesion. So there he is. Again, it looked like, they've been experimenting with anthrax. So you see my point. We were supposed to believe that the same group carried out 9/11 and the anthrax attacks, and it was a double perpetrator. It was Al-Qaeda based in Afghanistan, and it was the state of Iraq, and we're going to invade them both. And Kenneth Edelman, who was a former high government official in the Reagan administration, laid it all out pretty clearly in an interview in October 2001. He said, look, I think George Bush has a mission. It's almost a divine mission, and that is to attack terrorism and states that, have WMD. And he said, you can't always find terrorist groups and destroy them, but by God, you can find the countries that sponsor them, and you can destroy them. And he says in the very next breath, Afghanistan and Iraq are the countries we have to go after. They may not be weak, but they're not strong. We can get them. He says, I don't have any actual evidence that Iraq was involved in this thing, but I feel it. Okay? Which apparently was enough at the time. So to sum it up, these countries of Afghanistan and Iraq and this amorphous group called Al-Qaeda, which is so useful because you can never pin it down, it's always scary and you never know where they are. These people were set up well in advance. These invasions were planned well in advance. And we need to look at the relationship between the anthrax attacks and the 9/11 attacks because, yes, they were connected. They were the same people behind them all. And the very fact that the anthrax attack thing fell apart so quickly, is one of the reasons we have to keep talking about it. And we can't let the media go silent on it, which is what they've done. They want to forget that it ever happened. No, we don't forget that it happened. We remember it happened.
Yeah, this seems like one of the most productive avenues of penetration into who the actual perpetrators of the 9/11 attacks were, because of these links, and because this breach has been made into their obscurity by the failure to contain, the official account, to sustain the official account of the anthrax attacks. We can actually use that as a way into figuring out who was involved in 9/11. I think it's an extraordinary. I think you certainly put it together more succinctly and with the proper emphasis, proper from the standpoint of people who are principally concerned about 9/11 truth. So I think that's an extraordinarily powerful analysis. We also have other independent evidence that the planning for the attack on Iraq was it was apparently the highest priority of the Bush administration on day one. That guy Clark, the former anti-terror czar or whatever, he attested that in early meetings the Bush administration was all about going into Iraq.
That's right. That's right. Iraq was in the crosshairs even years.
And then we have people in Afghanistan and Pakistan saying, they're planning to, and India saying they've got the war plan in Afghanistan ahead of time. So just like you said, these two areas were pre-planned well ahead, and these attacks were the pretexts for them.
That's right. And the gentleman who stood up in Peshawar and talked about oil had a lot going for him there. That would be another subject, but I guess our time's almost up, so all the other things we were going to talk about, maybe some other time.
I would love that. Would you be willing to come on again in the future?
Oh, sure.
Okay. I would just like then to close with your reflections on the ignorance in the anti-war movement about these crucial events and the continuing ignorance. And those people that you mentioned in their presentations recently, one has to assume that they genuinely are ignorant. We've only got 1 minute left, but would you like to say something about this ignorance? Yeah, well, it's the reason I gave a talk in New York a couple of years ago or a year and a half ago on 9/11 and the peace movement or whatever. I'm tempted sometimes to just denounce everybody, but it's no good. It's no good. I mean, I am a member of the peace movement. Who am I denouncing? It doesn't work to denounce. We have to just somehow say, look, my friends, your hearts are in the right place, and you're smart people, and on other subjects, you're perfectly capable of approaching governments and military organizations with suspicion. On this one, you seem to not get it. So please allow me to give a talk to you. This is what I'm trying to do in my hometown. And I finally have been able to give several talks and to slowly persuade a few people and to bring visiting speakers. So I'll be bringing Niels Harrit, the nanothermite guy, in a couple of weeks to give a talk at my university. And I think we're making slow progress. And then, final word, this coming September 11th, we're putting on 4 days of citizens' hearings in Canada, in which a lot of the big researchers will be there. And we're going to record these and transcribe them and all kinds. Well, fantastic. Graeme, I'm sorry that we've run out of time. Your work is amazingly fine. It's truly excellent, and I think everybody got a feeling for the quality of, you may be depending upon others, but you have a way of penetrating and laying out the significance better than most, and I want to thank you very much for coming on the show.
Well, thank you, Todd. I'm honored to have been on your show, and thanks for doing your own research on this so well.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
Well, everybody, that's it. I'm afraid we've run out of time. Talk to you next week.